What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and today we're checking out a quick little trick that you might not have known about inside of Soothe 2 from Oak Sound. You've probably heard about Soothe 2 by now. It's really blown up and it seems like practically everybody is using it. But if you're not familiar with it, I've got a video covering it that I'll link up here. But in this video, I just wanted to go over one trick that I started using it for. So let's jump into Pro Tools to check it out. If you own the original Soothe and then upgraded to Soothe 2, you may have noticed that they added a sidechain feature. And that opens up a lot of cool possibilities for us. The technique I'm going to show you today involving this is frequency-dependent sidechain ducking using Soothe. So to set this up, I have Soothe here loaded in at the end of my bass bus. Then on my kick track, I have a send set up, and I'm sending that to a track I have called Kick Sidechain. Then back within Soothe, up here you can set what the sidechain input is, and I just have that set to that same input, Kick Sidechain. Now if I just hit play, you'll see that Soothe is just acting normally to the bass and ducking out some mid-range, and that's because we don't have the sidechain turned on yet. If you hit this button here, Soothe will start to listen to our kick drum in this case, instead of the bass. And this button right next to it is the sidechain cue. You can actually listen to what the sidechain is. So in this case, this should be our kick drum. And it is. So we'll turn that off so we're listening to our bass again. But now if we hit play, Soothe is ducking out some frequencies on the bass every time the kick hits. But right now with the default settings, it's ducking out some stuff at like 4K, and that's not what I want to do in this case. What I want to do is duck out the low end from the bass for just a second every time the kick hits. So to set that up, we'll just turn this high pass filter off. We'll bring this low pass filter way down here, maybe to, I don't know, 100 something. And let's bring this boosted frequency down as well. So let's try now. So now every time that the kick drum hits, Soothe is ducking out a little bit of the low end, just in the frequencies where the kick drum is sitting, in the bass guitar, to make room for the kick. And to dial this in a little farther, let's bring our drums in. Now we'll really be able to hear how the bass and the kick drum are interacting with each other. Alright, so I made a couple changes there. I made the attack time as fast as it can go, because we want the low end of the bass ducking out as soon as the kick drum hits. And then I left a pretty fast release. I gave it a little bit more time. You can just tweak that to see what feels right, but in general, we're going to want that to be pretty fast too when we're dealing with drums. And then in this case, I cranked the sharpness up all the way, so it's really just ducking right on those frequencies where the kick drum is sitting in the low end. You can see if I bring this way down towards the other extreme, it's taking out a much wider frequency range. So by turning it up, it's really just focusing right on that fundamental of the kick drum. So now that our kick and our bass are working well together, let's see where else we can use this same technique. So here's another instance that I used in this mix. In this case, I have Soothe set on my rhythm guitar bus, and the sidechain is set to my snare drum. And once again, since we're dealing with a really transient heavy thing, in this case a snare drum, I have my attack and release times both very fast. But this time, instead of focusing on one super specific area, like we're just focusing in on the fundamental of the kick drum when we're dealing with the bass, here we're going a little bit wider, but kind of focusing on two areas. One, sort of the upper mid-range attack of the snare drum, so, 4 to 5K. And then down here, we've got the fundamental of the snare drum around, 180 to 200 area. But then we're doing one more interesting thing. I have Soothe set to mid-side mode, and then I have the balance cranked all the way to only mids. So since our snare drum is panned in the center, Soothe is just going to duck out the mid information between these guitars to make a little hole right in the middle for the snare drum, while leaving the side information untouched. So let's check that out. I'll pop this in and out so you can hear what it's doing. So hopefully you can hear that. It's fairly subtle, but with it in, the snare drum just pops through a little bit more and is a little bit easier to hear. I'll play that one more time while popping it in and out, And specifically try to listen to how easy it is to hear the snare. Don't try to hear the ducking on the guitars. Just hear the clarity of the snare drum. And one other difference you might notice as opposed to our kick and bass example is I have the sharpness way on the opposite end of the spectrum. And that's because since we're looking at more or less the full frequency spectrum here, and especially when we get in our high end, when you crank the sharpness up, Soothe will start making these really, really tiny itty bitty little cuts. But we're really looking for just like a nice gentle dip up in this area. I'll show you what I mean. So yeah, if you were watching the graph here, you could see what I was talking about. So you really need to play around with that setting to see what works with the particular tracks you're working with. But there are a ton of different ways you can use this. Another one I'll do a lot is I'll have Soothe on a lead guitar track or something like that, some form of lead element, and I will send the vocals to the sidechain. This way, whenever the vocal comes in, that lead guitar or whatever will duck out of the way just a little bit. And most importantly, just in the areas where the vocal is sitting. And then I can further tweak exactly where it's doing it with the graph here. And in a case like that, you'll probably want to use a little bit gentler attack and release times. Since a vocal isn't so transient heavy, you don't need that super, super fast attack and release. And setting them both just a little bit slower will make it feel a little bit more natural. So what do you think? If you own Soothe, is this something you've already been doing? If not, give it a shot. And if you like this video and want to see more tips and tricks like this, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and head on over to bettermixes.com to check out the world's greatest drum samples, to learn more about my mixing course, and a whole lot more.